Hey, this is Boaz. Thanks for showing up. Please visit the Fools and Sages podcast at foolsandsagespodcast.com. There are no spaces and it's all spelled out. You can find show notes, references, bios, merch, and other cool features. Contact us if you have feedback or a question, if you want to appear on the show, or if you want either or both of us to be a guest on your podcast. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and anywhere else great podcasts are found. And follow us on X and Instagram. Support us on Patreon. The Patreon link's also in our website. And thank you. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the Fools and Sages podcast, in which we fools attempt to bring ideas from philosophy to people who are interested in applying them in their own lives. I'm Boaz. I've been a founder and executive in renewable energy businesses, and now I consult on transformation with various organizations.
And I'm Brian. Welcome to Fools and Sages. I'm a teacher, a builder, an artist, and a backyard philosopher.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. Today's setup might be a little longer than usual, or might have a couple of turns in it. So bear with me. It's October 6th, 2024, as we sit here recording, and I just spent 3 days at Rosh Hashanah services at Romemu in New York City with Rabbi David Ingber, and had some experiences there. Just by way of context, Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and it's the beginning of a 10-day period of introspection that ends with Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And October 7th falls right in the middle of that. And that, of course, is the first anniversary of the worst pogrom against Jews that we've seen since the Holocaust. And there were a number of experiences that I had during the 3 days of Rosh Hashanah services that we might talk about several of them separately, but there was also an overarching theme. One of the rituals at Rosh Hashanah is the blowing of the shofar, which is a ram's horn. And Rabbi Ingber, when it was time to blow the shofar, talked about the shofar in this instance being a metaphor for many things, and he talked about many of them. And one of them was, it was a tunnel that we're filling with air, and it was reminding him of the tunnels in which there are still 101 hostages being held. At least we hope that 101 hostages are still alive. And he imagined us as the congregation breathing air into those tunnels, breathing hope into those tunnels, letting those hostages know it's not time to give up yet and that we're with them. And whereas in shofar ceremonies I've seen before, the rabbi calls out the shofar blasts really energetically. Rabbi Ingber called them out really quietly, like tekiah, not tekiah. And the congregation was silent, and the shofar would blow, and then the next call, and the shofar would blow again. And I, for one, was absolutely visualizing breathing life and air and hope into those tunnels. And my sense was that the majority of the congregation was doing that too. And it made me think about prayer, and something that we've talked about before in the context of shamanism, of packaging this kind of mental energy with physical energy and sending it somewhere, and that being a skill that we can develop. And it also got me thinking about what differences there might be between individual prayer and collective prayer. And I know that you've seen in ceremonies and maybe in other contexts, sometimes there being a great power in the collective, bringing energy to something. And sometimes it can also be really distracting. You've got folks that are still in a condition of receiving as opposed to bestowing, to use a metaphor that you've used in prior episodes, and people that are very much um, in their own minds, or maybe in their own way, and aren't necessarily able to contribute, and might even detract from a collective endeavor. And so there's a few themes there relating to prayer. What what it's about, what does it make possible, the individual and the collective. And I thought I'd just float that out there, because it's very much on my mind, and I feel like prayer has been with me since I left Romemu. I got back to Santa Fe yesterday. I'm in Santa Fe today. Went for a hike this morning, and I've got the songs in my head. I've got that moment of the shofar blowing very much in my head. I have the hostages in mind, and yeah, curious to hear
Well,
what comes up for you.
well, let's see. Do you remember when we did the episode and I was talking about this idea of sending intent? And you said that was maybe not that familiar of an idea. It seems like you have a better idea now.
I think I meant that it wasn't that familiar an idea, in general, maybe, but
Oh, yeah. Okay.
okay.
I mean, it just seemed like there's like maybe you have another grasp as a result of the high holidays here, which is exactly what high holidays are for. Okay, that we improve our grasp. Um, yeah, boy, so many mysteries there. You know, one of the things, and just the first image that you had there of blowing through the tube, it reminded me of God, when I was really young, and I don't remember whether this was in the Zen center that I lived in or which tradition, but they were really down on blowing out candles. And the reason was because they said that the breath is really sacred and you shouldn't just use it indiscriminately, but that there is something that's very, very sacred about the breath. And you know what comes up for me with that also is because in the ceremonies, one of the things that I found useful was to do the methods of the soplarengi. And so in Spanish, sopla means to blow, and a soplarengi is somebody who uses their breath to work on patients, basically. And often they will use tobacco, so they'll be blowing tobacco smoke on you, or they might use agua florida, which is a perfume water, flower water, literally, that they will take a shot of and aerosol you with it. They will blow down on the top of your head. They'll blow down at the back of the neck. They'll blow down at the front. They'll blow down your fingers. And I know that in the times when I've had that done to me, when I was in a very non-ordinary space, the effect of the sopla was like sparks, like coming off of a welder. You know how sparks will fly off of a welder, except they were white. They weren't yellow like the iron. Uh, And I can remember one. I was talking with another ayahuasquero, and we were discussing sopla and the effect of tobacco. And he described being in a ceremony, looking over at a guy in a ceremony that he thought was particularly creepy, and he said he saw all of these like a pit of dragons or snakes or something overlaid over this guy. And he said the shaman, and this was someone down in South America. He could have been this was Scott, uh, he could have been with the Shipibitos. And he said the shaman on the other side of the room took his cigarette, his mapacho, and he took a big hit on it, and he did a big all the way across the room. He said he saw this big cloud of smoke billowing, rolling across the room towards the snake pit guy. And he said when that cloud of smoke hit that image, that all of those serpents just were, the image that he used was like if you put a plastic bag in a fire and it just kind of melts and falls and then it's gone. And he said after that happened, then the shaman walked up to him and started to work on him. But clearly there was something extra that was going on with that big puff of tobacco smoke. And that was an example of the intent of the soplarengi putting it out through his breath. And, the idea of the ram's horn also, my immediate association is in battle, the horn in battle. And it calling, in which case, of course, it is a very yanganizing influence. But in ceremonies, I also became very familiar and associated with the wind or the power of the wind, not just a remolino, the whirlwind,
Waira.
but the waida.
Waira, yeah.
Okay. But its ability in its quiet form to make it into places that that works its way in, that can carry a blessing and can carry light into a place that maybe the torrent or the remolino, the whirlwind, can't easily penetrate. So there are these different qualities there to that. And the breath is a secret to that because the breath lives between conscious and unconscious, right? So it's in a way it participates in the conversations we've had about the different parts of the brain. You can hold your breath, but you don't stop breathing when you go to sleep. So it sits in that place, which is why yogis have used it and why it sits in that respected condition.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually thinking of the soplata while that was going on, and doing it subtly with those tunnels in mind. And I was actually physically blowing intent into those tunnels, not just psychically,
Hmm.
or I guess a combination of
Right.
those. Um,
So we
yeah.
didn't talk about the collective part of that yet, but if you want to drill down.
Well, I think I was just going to say that I haven't experienced prayer so much in synagogue before, and that surprised me because I've experienced people looking like they're praying, but in this moment, the experience that I had was much more like many experiences I've had in ceremonies, um, where the target was clear and
Uh-huh.
the intent was aligned and the ritual fit that intent.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it was just
Yeah.
interesting and also profound.
Right. Well, and if you remember when we talked about that idea of putting will into a thought form, um, we talked about the element of will and emotional energy that goes behind that. And I think that in a group situation, we are used to not manifesting emotional energy. Um, we're sort of on our best behavior. We're under
Mm.
the impact of those tertiary Freudian drives that make public life polite. But when we get into a situation where we're just suffering, or we're just very concerned, or where the emotions can't be ignored, then when we share them together, can be a reinforcing effect for sure. And I mean, and that's also part of the madness of crowds, because it can go different ways. But this idea of intentionally bundling intent, like we do when we work together in a ceremony, uh, this is a big old idea. And the idea goes back to the ceremonial white magical tradition, and they call the idea basically is of an egregore. And an egregore is like a psychic entity that becomes a vessel for this energy that humans can send with a thought form. So one of the examples that I remember being used was of the American eagle or the Russian bear. And so now this idea of the eagle starts to take on a life in the semantic world that we spoke about before. That's not what an eagle is, that just flies in the sky and eats fish and hangs out in trees. This is something now that a number of humans start to associate with, and they start to send thoughts to. Or, for example, the Virgin Mary, where a lot of people in times of suffering, in times of great emotion, they package a thought form and they send it to that place. Well, now with that happening over centuries and centuries, that egregore becomes a battery, if you will. It becomes a well of all this human intent and emotion that people can have a relationship with. Just like you can have a relationship with your country and the National Association, or I mean, you can see how these things can be built and associated with your football team, right? There's a lot of people that go into an emotional state when their team wins or loses. Well, you could say that team, that concept of that team is not just like an empty concept hairbrush, right? Nobody sends emotional energy to the concept hairbrush, but they send a lot of emotional energy to their football team, maybe. And then when the football team loses, they go through a corresponding emotional adjustment because of association with this thought form that has been fed with collective human emotional energy. So you think about that, that's kind of an unusual thing, really, you know? And this idea, wherever three or more are gathered in my name, uh, gives that idea of a collective or a multiplying effect of intent, of pure intent, right? And I mean, I think in ceremonies we see that, we learn about it, and how to put our intent together. And this, I would wager, is a big part of the big lesson that we're all here for. If we're really going to bring all of our potential to fruition, I think that's one of the things we need to learn to do, is we need to learn to fill a collective vision with life energy. And as soon as the more we climb that ladder, the more we bear we get the fruits of that process. And I mean, I see history as a lesson in collective action and lack of collective action and the nature of collective action. And part of that is through this projection of thought form and our empowering that thought form. So anyway, there's a lot there, a lot.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can say more about seeing history in that way. I mean, you can kind of take any binary, right? And like history being um, about power or about
or cooperation.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know that that's yeah. What is the value of seeing it as a, a story of collective action or collective inaction? Like, how does that make meaning for you?
Oh, uh, well, I think I really started to try to ponder this more deeply when we started with working with the community in Uganda, in Africa. And, it's a version of the question, Jared Diamond, who wrote the Germs, Guns, and Steel, and he said it was one of the islanders in Southeast Asia that asked him, "How come you guys have all the cargo and we don't?" So he goes, he writes a whole book about what is that, and he attributes it to the geographical factors, and he really unfolds it. But an element there, when I started to try to understand it in our modern era, was it comes down, it seems a lot, and I wish I had could put my finger on the research, but it seems intuitively true that the greater cooperation or trust there is in a society, the richer it becomes. And that was one of the things that we did see in Africa, was that Africans were very quick to inform us at every turn how low trust a society it really was. And so, there is this
Can you
question.
give an example of that?
Um, oh, well, just the fact that they were hypersensitive to getting stuff stolen, whether it was honeybee hives or your cell phone snatched out the window of your car. But another example, I love physical examples because they're dimensional, right? There's this thing that you can do, and I heard that they did it in Central Park with the world's record was in Central Park. But basically, get a bunch of your friends, say, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 friends, stand in a circle. You all put your left leg to the inside of the circle. So you're staring at the back of the person to your right. You stick your left foot in and you start to bend down so that the person in front of you can sit on your left knee as you're sitting down on the person behind your's left knee. And then all at once, you all put the right leg in and you're all sitting on the lap of the person behind you. And this works until everybody starts laughing and giggling too hard, and then it all collapses. And for it all to collapse, it only takes basically one person breaking the chain, because it is like what Bucky would call a tensegrity structure, right?
Who's Bucky?
It's
Buckminster Fuller?
Buckminster Fuller, yeah. And so, but there's a moment there when everybody has to trust the system and leap into it and put that second leg in and really trust the knee that they're sitting on. And that is cooperative community trust. And if I don't have a certain amount of that, that this was invented by a soldier so that the troops could rest and not get wet sitting in the wet grass. So this was the way to do it, right? And so, but it's such a beautiful analogy, right? It's such a beautiful physical metaphor of how together we can do stuff we just can't do if we're not all on the same page. Well, connect that to, if we're all in the will to receive, then we can't kind of get on the same page the same way. Although in this case, we all receive, right? But we need trust to get into that position. And that means that betraying the trust becomes it's like betraying our potential. It's like letting us all down, right? And so there, there's a lot of interesting metaphors to that. Um, and But collective vision is the beginning, and also maybe some kind of creative discontent. Maybe we'll get sorry or tired or just burnt out on continually torturing each other. And then we'll say, wow, the potential here, if we just got over the humps, is just so much beyond. That's also what Bucky Fuller said. he said, if we work together, we can escape Malthus and the Malthusian idea. You remember Edward Malthus? I know this is kind of far afield, but he was the guy that basically said the human population is going at a geometrical progression and the resources are only going at an arithmetical progression. So there's going to be less and more that want it. And well, Bucky said, no, we've changed all that math now. Like that's old school thinking, but we still have that Malthusian psychology, running us, particularly people that are way up at the top of the game who should be like get with the new program, right? But so some are, some aren't. This is part of that growing thing. The theme that I've had is that this is just a self-organizing system, and no matter what we do, we're just going to go through the stages. We're just going to be organized, like it or not, kicking and screaming by the force of nature and evolution. And as I've said before, we're just going to have to grow out of our pesky caterpillar ways before the butterfly thing happens. But so that's about that collective vision and collective projection. And and it's interesting because some saints have shown ways of influencing that. And some of the sages through history have found ways of,
Can
influencing.
you say more about that?
The thought that leaped to mind was Neem Karoli telling some of the people in India that one of his American followers who was a doctor, he said, "What can I do?" Uh, I guess someone had asked Neem Karoli, "What should we do?" And Neem Karoli had a great formula, which I recommend for everyone, and that is love everyone, serve everyone, remember God. And so someone said, "How do I serve everyone?" And this guy was a doctor, so Neem Karoli said to him, "Why don't you cure cholera in India?" and and I would love to see his face when he said, "Dope. I should have asked Mike had to ask that question." But anyway, so we know how to cure cholera. It's not like he's asking an impossible thing. He's just asking a highly improbable thing. And I guess at that time in India, it took a lot of bakshish or grift to make people cooperative. But he would go around and he'd say, "Okay, I'm trying to do this. Can you help me? I'm trying to cure cholera in India." And people would say, "Oh, cure cholera in India? What are you, crazy?" And they wouldn't want to help. And they'd say, "Why are you even doing this?" Say, "Well, my guru Neem Karoli told me that I need." Neem Karoli told you to do that? Oh, well, if Neem Karoli said, and then they would help him. Then they would cooperate. As soon as it had the marca registrada of Neem Karoli, and apparently several years later, I don't know all the details on this, but apparently they did it. So there is this idea of influence, that influence can lift us to be our higher selves rather than to just operate, to stay stuck in that will to receive more and more from my mouth, bigger hamburger, bigger hamburger.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess um there's there's a consistent lesson for me too in the the folks in the collective who don't seem to be with the program. I can find difficult. And over and over, I have to remember that they're a mirror for me in some way. And that, who was it? I want to say a psychologist whose approach was unconditional positive regard. Rogers?
Carl Rogers, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Where
Empathic listening.
uh-huh.
You know.
Where you have somebody who's not in a condition to align their intent with the group, and instead of being annoyed with them, just kind of accepting them where they are, I know is a better way, but that can be tough to access.
Well, and that's where understanding some of the different dynamics that are at work and who are the best people for the job in that case. Uh, like I said before, and we didn't really get a chance to explicate it. I think I had referred to the five element system for sort of categorizing people's tendencies, and right down to their physiological tendencies. And I sort of went off in that last conversation in a more individual. I didn't really address the systems because there are many category systems, and all of them, like all models, they show some things and they hide some things, and so you are informed maybe by having several different models to work from. And so some people have a listening for some people and not for others. And when you understand that, like I know that there are some people that I will rub the wrong way no matter what I've done before I open my mouth. And I always take a step back and try to be very considerate in how I have those interactions. Whereas I know there's other people that I vibe with, so to speak, and then they're more sympathetic listeners. And so, yeah, whenever we encounter a confrontational energy, there is a tendency to want to recoil from it or to avoid it. And it does take a certain internal positioning to move into those positions. And it takes a certain amount of personal power, I think. And I don't mean that in an ego sense. I mean in an ability to do difficult things
Mhm.
and to have some of those difficult conversations and to realize that there is a way to have those and that sometimes just having that, pushing through that, you're on the whole other place. Uh, that's part of the genius. One of Werner Erhardt's philosophical machines is the bloody rhinoceros head. You recall that?
Yeah, but go ahead.
The setup of the bloody rhinoceros head, I think that he usually gives is a young man and a young woman go out on a date, and the bloody rhinoceros head is whether or not they're going to have a romantic encounter as a result of the date. But they're never going to talk about that directly, typically. At least in the old days, they wouldn't when we were young. And they would talk about the weather and they'd talk about, every other thing. And Werner would say that topic, whether they're really going to, have an encounter or not, it's like a big bloody rhinoceros head sitting on the table right between them, and neither of them is going to say a word about it because it's just the. So Werner has this idea about speaking the bloody rhinoceros head, right? Wouldn't make any sense without that setup. But that idea of, okay, there's something difficult here. Is there a way that you can move into it and not exacerbate the disharmony there? Yeah, that can be tricky, and not everybody is tractable, right? Uh,
Do you have a story
regarding,
about having that kind of conversation?
oh, well, the ones I suppose the ones that I can think of are pretty distant. For example, there was a situation with a young girl that was brought to me, and she was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. And there was some guy in the neighborhood that was feeding her drugs so that he could have romantic encounters with her. And she came and she told me that. And so when I heard that, there was a difficult conversation that I had to have with this guy. And it wasn't a threatening conversation. It was a conversation that was, look, I know what's going on here. And this is a person that, you can't be doing this to because it's, really uh, detrimental and this is inappropriate. I'm asking you, don't be doing this. And and then I heard that he tried one more time and she came back very proud and said she was able to rebuff him. Uh, but that's an example of, and then there's a further part to that story where he ultimately just left the area. Um, but uh, but that's the kind of a hard conversation that it was difficult for me, but the problems that might resolve for someone else for not having that conversation might have been way more extreme, you know. And that kind of comes down to what for me becomes the basic question of morality. And I mean, maybe this is the long way around to this topic, but to me, the question is how much suffering are you willing to have to let others experience for you to get what you want? And you can define that a bunch of different ways, but this is a version of, are you willing to have difficult conversations? Are you willing to experience a little bit of unpleasantness to maybe prevent somebody else from having a lot more unpleasantness, And I think that anytime you have a conversation with somebody where you're honestly trying to say, "Hey, pal, you really could have done better here, and I want to support you to do better here. But not doing better here is maybe not acceptable in this setting." And those are all difficult conversations for sure.
Yeah. I guess one of the aspects of prayer that I've been thinking about the last few days is how to balance it in my own life with other kinds of doing. I think, I love it. And it made me think that there's a new chapter, or part of the new chapter I'm starting, and the developing relationship with Judaism that I'm experiencing involves um, praying in new ways. And I see the experience I had with ceremonies as learning how to pray to a large extent. And being exposed to it in this context makes me think, well, here's a way to integrate um, kind of how I see my relationship with Judaism and with community with my love for prayer. And what would it look like if I spent a bunch of my time praying? And that also means, like in the story you told about Neem Karoli Baba and his doctor um, friend, that there's actually going out into the world and physically doing things, and there's prayer. And I guess more and more I see prayer as a kind of doing things. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about the praying and the doing and how those relate to each other, and maybe in your life, or what you see as a framework for balancing those.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I probably personally, in a more traditional setting, the only prayer that I really have is to be blessed into usefulness. Uh, I'm not concerned. I don't have a football team to pray for the playoffs. Uh, I I think that once you've shifted gears in a certain place, uh, th- the idea of praying for yourself certainly, um, it has no place for me other than
Let me
making use of
clarify.
it.
I'm not talking about praying for myself.
Oh no, I don't think you are. I don't think I didn't get that you were, but I want to say that as a qualifier
Okay.
because this is what many people hear. So if you're not praying for yourself, then you are basically, when I talked about trying to put yourself in harmony with the creative forces of the universe, with the unfolding of the flowers, with the Hunyuan Chi, with the the positive unfolding of everything. the nature of God's love for the universe, right? And so, one like I think I mentioned this before. One of my friends asked a Zen master, "What can he do to assist or help the enlightenment of the human race?" And the Zen master told him, "There's nothing you can do. The enlightenment of the human race was ensured with the enlightenment of the first Buddha. So now it's just needs the formality of occurrence." And so there is this process. Like I look at the news now and I understand it differently. I tend to like there's a lot of suffering, and I find myself saying, I hope everybody's learning a lot. Like, um, there's discussion. Should this person be elected? Should this person be elected? Should we adopt this policy? Should we adopt this other policy? But from the seat that I've been sitting in lately, what I'm seeing is that we just are going to go through what we have to go through. There's no way around that. Uh, this is a process. We are in the midst of this process. We are units in a self-organizing system that's going to go through cyclic change on its way to its, what do I pick? Eschaton, omega point, its fruition, its flowering, and um, so I don't know what that means. That I trust the Bhagavad Gita when it says that this, is all grist for the mill, and that we come out as a higher identity? I guess it does. And I guess my personal experiences have reinforced that. But it doesn't mean that we just need to go through it. And, that's why the Buddhist approach is, and I think the one I've taken on for myself is to try to choose the path that causes the least suffering within my possibility. And
I it, I think it's maybe worth expounding a little bit. Like if we have to go through it, that's almost a pass for not acting virtuously.
oh no, yeah, we must act virtuously. Yeah.
But we have to go through it anyway. So how do you reconcile that? Like and I'm thinking very much about the hostages in Israel and
Right.
or in Gaza, so we have to go through that. They have to go through it. Obviously, they're going through it, but we got to get them out of there too, right? So what about that?
Well, I think that when we tune this up to the highest level, we are them, right? And on both sides, we are all of us, right? And with that idea that no man is free while one is in prison, we are all going through this. And I feel like it will require a state of collective realization for us to step past it. I mean, I think that suffering itself is the reason uh, why we must operate. I mean, I gave a long lecture about virtue and the absolute necessity of virtue, both for yourself and others and all other concerned members, and that 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 it is worth acting to reduce suffering, I guess. And not that that suffering isn't achieving something. So, but our striving for virtue is essential, actually, for the development of our awareness. Um, yeah. I mean, I think that this is this is involved with the mystery of Jesus dying on the cross. Um, the suffering that is involved, and what is the thing that makes that suffering not just animal suffering? It's this higher meaning, right?
Can you say more about that?
Um, well, uh,
Or what does the story of Jesus mean to you?
well, I mean, there's so many things it means, but I think the part we're talking about here is that you need to do the right thing, even if you're going to be captured and tortured by your enemies. And that if you're going to be playing all in, then you have to have gone through some process to know that you're doing the right thing. And that process is internal, and that with the right internal content, as we spoke about, in the universe being a place out of which you cannot fall, because Giordano Bruno is the same story, right? Burnt at the stake uh, for his realizations. Um, this, I mean, you could probably look at the hero with a thousand faces in Joseph Campbell and see that there is a what's the word? A transcending, transforming effect through that process of sacrifice. Um, yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about it because there is a fundamental mystery there, which again, it's tied in, as we spoke about before, the fundamental mystery of identity. And what does it mean to say I am? And therefore, what does it mean to say I sacrifice myself? Um, and uh, and then we get down to it with onion peelings, and in the end, we're all just God playing puppets with ourselves. The joke of the general at the expense of the particular.
Can you go back to um, the suffering of the hostages is all of our suffering, and for that matter, the suffering of the hostage takers is all of our suffering. Can you flesh that out more?
Yeah. Um, we have been doing this to each other for kalpas upon kalpas, according to the Buddhist doctrine. Uh, According to the Buddhist teachings, we have been each other's mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters countless times. And we've spent lifetimes causing suffering for ourselves and others. And that uh, through this long and painful process, we wrench some kind of awareness. And through that, uh, um, through that purification, through that purging, we uncover we uncover God, basically, or we uncover the ability, the aspects within ourself to have a deeper relationship with the bigger universe and the creative powers of the universe. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is kind of like, what kind of game is God playing with himself, itself, herself? Uh, you remember my describing it being a child and just getting the sense of how strange it was to be incarnated in a body and to be a person, to have an identity, and just all of that is very strange. And so this is all tied up with that fundamental mystery. The mystery of God is no more a mystery than the mystery of you. I mean, right? So like both of these things cannot be defined except in terms of other things that are part of the problem, right? That's this Buddhist idea, and I misspoke in our previous episode. So one of the few mistakes that I wanted to go back and correct, when I was saying that the 10,000 things, I said are causes, and I meant to say they're effects of this deeper thing, right? So this idea of all these things being causes, the Buddhists have this idea they call dependent originations, that all of these things, all of the 10,000 things, ourselves included, all kind of arose together. We're all part of the same field, I think, is what Fajin would say. And so being part of that same field, there is more usness than there is separateness. And that's when all these saints are talking about the illusion of separateness, that the ego is part of this illusion of separateness. and that the semantic world reinforces this illusion of separateness. So, with the mystery of us and the mystery of God is the mystery of everybody else that's also a self. And and this is something that I come back to frequently, I find, and that is that we don't have respect for the fundamental mystery of identity, of I-ness, and that if we did, we'd be very different about things. Um, so, and the more we, again, I quoted Ramana Maharishi from the Advaita Vedanta tradition, who said, if you just ask yourself, who am I, you will become enlightened, because the answer will be God. Well, you could ask, who is everybody else? And you're going to get the same answer. And so maybe we just have to do this over and over until we get it. I don't know. These are the mysteries of it. But whatever we go through, there is an optimal. There is a level of consciousness and compassion and wisdom that we can try to bring with that. And sometimes you're in a war, sometimes you're in a garden.
What was that a reference from?
Well, it's a reference to the Zen saying that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in the middle of a war.
Ah,
but sometimes you're in both situations,
yeah.
and that's part of what this warrior thing is it's not about being a badass. It's about having a willingness to make a sacrifice. Um, and so, but no, there are fundamental mysteries, and you can't just answer those. You have to ponder those. You have to live those out. Who am I is one of those. You don't get that in a weekend. And who is everybody else, and who is the universe? What is the universe trying to do when it's universing us? We could have a much better time at this if we gave those questions more respect.
Mm.
In like a conversation that we've had before, um, I like to slap around Descartes, but I also like to slap around most of modern philosophers and people that espouse themselves as philosophers. Um, just to tell you, just to show you what the depth of depravity that it's come to. When I was in college, I attended a lecture by the self-proclaimed world's highest paid philosopher. If that strikes you as oxymoronic, that's good. And this was a guy who said that all of modern philosophy amounted to no more than footnotes on a copy of Aristotle. So
Oh,
he
he
was an
thought Aristotle was the peak.
Aristotelian. Yeah, his name was
Huh.
Mortimer J. Adler, and he would come and give a lecture every year. And every year, the seniors would prank him. So one lecture, he came, and at some cue, we were in like an auditorium, with the slanted cement floor and the bolted metal seats. So they let go like 10,000 ping pong balls from the top, and they all started doing the pachinko machine thing, hitting and going down and all. And then another one, they had a telephone in the podium, and that rang during his lecture, and he picked it up, and I think it was Stringfellow Bar, or one of the old school professors there. And but the reason I like to beat them up is because a lot of modern philosophers haven't helped most people much at all lately. It's become like a super specialized hyper priesthood language kind of thing, and there's this wealthy tradition of a human effort to unfold and uncover and live in harmony with universal principles and values. And so the idea that it's kind of become frittered into this thing where it's about who can get paid the highest amount of money to do it, it's like you're going to have Diogenes rolling over in his grave here, right? So, the famous meeting between Diogenes and Marcus Aurelius. And
Tell.
Marcus Aurelius, he comes and he's he says to Diogenes, "What can I do for you?" Because he's like the emperor, right? Also a wonderful philosopher in his own right. And Diogenes says, "Maybe you could step out of my sunlight." That was his only comment, right? And Diogenes was quite the character. Um, but philosophy should be something that everybody can make some use of. Uh, you know, there was this cynical attitude in the beginning of the 1900s that most people should just be good factory workers, and that their education should facilitate that, inevitable destiny. And that's not really education, right? So do you work to live? Do you live to work? If you work so that you can live, then there's got to be things that you live for, and and that's where meaning comes in. And religion can fulfill some of those requirements, but I think and I've said this before, I think the tendency in history has been towards more individual rights, more individual awareness, and more individual autonomy in metaphysical things. But there's a great, this is part of what Nietzsche saying God is dead meant. In a lot of ways, what he was saying was, I don't know how to say it in German, but he was saying, you're on your own. And so what speaks into that void? What speaks into that question of how do we have a life with meaning? The human tendency usually moves towards hedonism, until some kind of collective realization is that maybe that won't ring the bell, and we might be in one of those cycles now, I think, because of this loss of traditional values. And not to say that people can't use traditional values to do unenlightened things, but we did have an enlightenment. Like we do have values like liberty and fraternity and brotherhood, right? And so what is this idea? We're in the midst of waking up from history, and sort of, I just am always trying to say we can do better, we can do better, we can do better. Put your head to it, put your heart to it, put your belly to it. We can do better, and philosophy can help us do that. Even old philosophy, even antique philosophy, right? So
Yeah, I think that circled back to my question, and maybe you answered it as much as you're inclined to at this point, but I'll ask it again. In the direction of doing better, we can do better. We can do better. Um, I'm really sitting with how much prayer can be an act of doing better.
yeah,
Um, and how do we balance that with being out in the world doing better?
right. Well, that is how you balance it, by being out in the world. I mean, I feel like prayer in the loosest, most widely defined terms adds ballast to your boat. Um, when the waves become formidable, you have more stability. Um, but I think that there's a process that one goes through, and that's why I do think the idea of prayer needs to be qualified, and that it isn't just wanting your football team or your stock holdings to go up, or in fact,
Yeah. I'm talking about praying for something like the human beings waking up and realizing their divinity and their interconnectedness
yeah,
and creating a more peaceful world.
praying for the enlightenment of the human race,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that y- y- I think that, again, depending on the type of prayer and putting it into, there's so many contexts that one can come to the place where you do realize that that is an inevitability. Um, and the deeper you can rest in that, the more ballast you have. Um, the and that's why I want to qualify prayer so many different ways, because people qualify many different types of internal dialogue as prayer.
Mm.
Um, I don't know that like I think that there are internal processes to help you deal with anxiety, for example. And I think many people are moved to prayer, air quotes, to deal with personal anxiety. Um, that may be helpful. I'm not sure that's the highest form of prayer. Um, so you know, I guess apart from praying to be made useful, I would also pray for understanding. And uh, in a broader sense, many of the things that I would qualify as useful as prayer have to do with that turning on both brains and having them work together idea. That prayer does turn on that other space. That it does balance our brains in a certain way. Again, within those qualifiers of that territory. Um, so so those things may well help us process differently. They may help us, uh, and when I say put ballast in your ship, I mean like in our conversations about gumption, it may well increase your patience and increase your capacity for listening. It may well help. Um, I mean, for me, I guess there's different. It's like when people make reference to ceremonies, they'll make reference to trance. Well, you're in a trance, and there is this idea that there is a thing that is in a trance, and in fact, there's a wonderland of possibilities of non-ordinary states of consciousness that all get lumped into this idea of trance. Um, and I think that now our maps are a little vague, but those of us that have spent time in these other areas can start to recognize them a little bit, and to know that they're not all equal, and that like there's different places out there that you can go, and and so so prayer is the same way. There's a lot of internal spaces that we can have with inner dialogue, and what we're imagining that we're targeting it to, how personal that relationship is or can become, is dependent on a process that is going to be unique for everybody. But again, I connect it to sort of a physiological thing that things that have happened to us can interrupt our ability to have that deeper relationship, and that as we work those things out and clear those things up, more of the light gets through, and that so it might be a little more active process over years, and it might be a little more active seeking to stir that pot, and introspection, and um so there's a big territory there, and that's why I keep wanting to redefine prayer, because there's an entire field there. So for example, there are times when I just use mantra for that. There's times when I use Ikaro for that. And there's times when I might form a particularly strong thought form and try to send it. And maybe those are a little different. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of different things there. And I think that I'm recalling something that the Buddha said about the beginning of enlightenment being a turning around in the deep seat of consciousness. And so prayer is definitely a form of turning around.
What do you mean by turning around? Or what did the Buddha mean by turning around?
Well, I hesitate to speak for the Buddha, but our consciousness is outwardly directed. And, you know, to turn around in that deep seat of consciousness is a bit tricky. They say it's like trying to bite your own teeth, or uh, people presume a different state. Like some Zen masters have talked about trying to put a head on top of your head. So you already have a head. And that enlightenment is more of a getting out of the way than a getting of another head. Um, and so, I mean, there is a process there, and it's a mysterious process, but it's one that you're built for, and I'm convinced you're built for it all the way down to the physiological level, and uh, that we are in fact designed to have a deeper relationship with the universe than we currently have, and that there's an agenda to nature. And I know that makes me sound teleological, right? Telos is the Greek word for end, and teleological, that accusation, it typically means that you think that nature is working towards an end, as opposed to just random billiard balls bouncing and just picking the fittest, and the ones that survive, and the chips fall where they may, and there's no blueprint. It all just kind of happens as it chaotically, kind of. And yeah, I do believe that that there's something more going on than just a random ping pong ball game. I do think that consciousness is first, and not the result of piling up clever ping pong balls. Um, but again, I can't argue that comes from experience, and it's not a semantic experience fundamentally, so I can't really argue it. But if I
Yeah.
could go hear this and I could give you that experience, then I could just go that, right?
Drink
So
this.
drink this, the red pill or the blue pill. Wait, did you just take both pills? I love that.
Cool. Well, maybe let's pause there.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure we'll be coming back to a lot of these topics. So thank you, Brian. And I'll
Absolutely.
see you next time.
Sounds good. See everybody next time.